Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Young Leaders in Tech podcast, where we bring you insights from industry experts to help you navigate and thrive in the ever evolving tech landscape. I'm your host, John Keneally, and today we have a very special guest joining us. I'm delighted to welcome Christophe Foulon to the show. Christophe is a distinguished cybersecurity expert with over 15 years of experience in the field. He has been at the forefront of developing and implementing robust security strategies for many organizations worldwide, ensuring their digital assets remain protected against the growing threat landscape. Christophe is not only a practitioner, but also a passionate advocate for cybersecurity awareness and education. In today's episode, we'll be diving deep into the world of cybersecurity, discussing the latest trends, challenges, and best practices that organizations should adopt to safeguard their data. This is especially important in the world we live in today, with the wide adoption of AI practices and all the good and bad that can bring with it. Whether you're a seasoned professional or just starting out in the tech industry, Christophe's insights are sure to provide you with valuable knowledge and practical advice. So sit back, relax, and get ready to learn from one of the leading cybersecurity voices in the industry. Christophe, welcome to the show.
Well, I don't know how I'm going to live up to all that in the intro, but thank you very much for that.
No worries. So just like as I do with all of my speakers, I just kind of want to get a bit of background, get to know you a bit. So do you want to just give me a background to your own career and maybe how it's
Yeah,
changed over the years?
yeah, absolutely. So I'd say my desire for tech started as a kid. I was in the Caribbean. My parents had a marine hardware store, and the local PC tech, she was upgrading the hard drive to go from Windows 95 to Windows 98. So that ages me just a little bit. Um, I saw the machine opened up in all its guts and glory, and I was like, huh, that seems really cool. So ever since then, kind of been paying attention to the tech scene. Um, when I was young, I ended up working or being an intern or hanging around her internet cafe, removing viruses, upgrading machines, and kind of being her protege. And when I went to college, moved away from the Caribbean, went to the States, went to college, all the degrees were very focused on science and math and physics. And I was never that person. I was the person that loved to teach people how to use computers and use computers in a safe way to help them achieve what they wanted to do. So kind of deviated from that path, went down the business route and did that until 2008. Everything kind of crashed again, and I was like, this might be a sign for me to restart and just do something I love. So dove back into computers, started my first help desk role, and someone had a sticky note with a username and password taped to it. And I was like, there's got to be a better way. And that kind of then pivoted me again back from supporting just infrastructure and helping users to helping organizations do it safely and helping users do it safely. Um, my career didn't just pivot from that moment on over to security. It took a long route. And because of that and the journey that I had, I decided to create my own podcast. So I've been doing a podcast called Breaking Into Cybersecurity, where I would share the stories of those that just broke in, as well as the leaders that are looking to develop the next generation. Um, Wrote some books along the way on that topic, but yeah, been focused on helping organizations with digital transformation, with understanding the shared responsibility of risk within a cloud environment, as well as preparing themselves to adapt for an AI focused environment and how they can do that safely for potentially the next pivot in my career. Who knows?
Yeah, yeah. So that's great. And like, I'll touch on your books later when I get your book reading recommendations. We can get the names of those. But on the flip side, something that kind of what hasn't changed over the years. This is what I ask leaders all the time. Like, loads of stuff have changed, but what remained the same in your opinion?
I would say what remains the same is the tendency for organizations to have tribal knowledge not document it, even in the most mature organizations, you still kind of have to fight for them to document processes and procedures in order for you to truly understand what's happening in a certain department or what sort of risks an organization has, because there's so much that is still undocumented.
Yeah.
And in the head of the department leaders or the department engineers, and then they also then can suffer a lot of loss of information that has just never been captured when stakeholders leave, by their choice or not by their choice, towards the organization. And I would say that hasn't changed a lot, at least in
Yeah.
the past 10, 15 years that I've been leading organizations and helping to manage people.
Yeah, I find that a lot. I have a topic myself, support driven development, basically how you can build your product to make it easier on support. And one of the big things is just maintaining consistent documentation, updating it regularly, and keeping it recent, which is
Mhm.
is definitely something every team I've encountered struggles with. So like another thing, just on the the stuff that hasn't changed, like have the skills required to get into cybersecurity changed over the years?
Fundamentally, not really. So in the beginning, we were all tech people. So we had to understand how physical equipment interacted with each other over a network. And then within a computer, how components and how data is transferred between those components and between those layers. Today, it's obfuscated with cloud and no source application development platforms. So while it's obfuscated, you still need to know how to troubleshoot it. You still need to know how to support it. And oftentimes, individuals that want to come into cybersecurity, into tech, think because it's been obfuscated and someone else is providing the support or someone else is providing the service, that that's not something that they need to be concerned about. And like I mentioned earlier, the shared responsibility within a cloud environment or a service environment is something that you need to truly understand to support it, to lead it, to secure it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. It's funny you mentioned that. I was listening to a podcast recently where they were explaining that kids or young people these days, they don't know what a file explorer is. They don't know how to find files on their file system because they have tablets. They don't use Windows or desktop in a lot of cases. So it's kind of similar to that, I suppose.
Oh, oh yeah, definitely. I mean, you just search for it and you expect that it shows up. So when they go on a computer, you have to teach them how to do that. But it's very much the same when it comes to troubleshooting, is as you're onboarding or you're growing in an organization, ensure that you document your process flows, your critical dependencies, and put all that documentation down, because as someone else takes over the role, they'll have to use that in order to support it or figure out the hard way when something breaks, how to fix it.
Yeah. Back to your documentation example. If there's good
Yeah.
documentation, it's less painful. So look, just touching on your kind of your education, you're a staunch advocate for cybersecurity. Obviously, you're an educator in the cybersecurity field. And when I had a look at your history in preparation for this, I could see that you're fond of using real world examples to teach students about the risks associated with poor security, poor cybersecurity, or like just practices in general. Can you walk me through one or two of your favorite stories that you use to tell these teaching students and the lessons from it?
Well, I would say that really differs and depends on the lesson, but what I advocate is really, yes, you have the fundamental knowledge within the courses or within the boot camps, but you have to tie that knowledge to using it in the real world and to thinking as if you're in the real world. Oftentimes, students come out of college or come out of boot camp with an academic mindset of, oh, I know how to do this process, or I know how to secure it, from an educational standpoint. But then, like my first day as a help desk person, how to change the password, how to connect to AD to find that user to change the password. That was something they never taught us when we were going through it. But you knew how to find a user structure, you knew how to change the settings. It just wasn't taught how to connect to AD because you assume that they knew that. So it's that same assumption of knowledge and connecting it to a real world example that I try to teach, whether it be risk, whether it be IT basics, things like that. I would come up with a story that they would understand or that they could relate to.
Mm. Yeah, and is it all ages you teach, or a specific kind of cohorts?
Well, I would say I've been teaching undergrad. I've taught graduate courses, so that would be younger to more mid-level individuals, but advising executives and advising business leaders, sometimes some of them they have experience, so they might be a little bit older, but they might not understand how the concepts relate to what they learned when they were younger. So you need to just create a new analogy for them so that they can understand. Uh, an example of that, recently, I was on a camping trip with my mom, and they were teaching an older gentleman about fishing on his cell phone and how not to just click the links, how to verify who the number is. And if you know that number, connect it to your contacts. So you know that, oh, it's John texting me
Yeah.
versus, oh, hey, this is John from a random number. Click this link. So kind of going through that and teaching older generations about those real world concepts on a device that you're using that they they probably don't interact with emails, but they still interact with texts.
Yeah, yeah, it's something that I find is just getting more and more difficult. Even for me, I'd be fairly, like, I think I'd be fairly on touch with the kind of latest trends with phishing and kind of emails like that. But it is definitely getting more difficult to spot it. I'm finding myself more frequently messaging the security team in work. Hey, is this one safe to open? Just kind of building that into my practice, which I think they appreciate, so that they don't mind when I do that.
No, I think it's better to be on the safe side and on the other end from the security team, helping to share tips and tricks that the users can do to identify whether that be, hey, look at the reply address or look at the send address. This domain definitely isn't ours, so it might be suspicious. So kind of those little things, as they start to see trends of people reporting, then they can start to amount and create more specific training for that organization. And that's something I recommend all the time is that while you might do general user security awareness training, have some special training for the HR team, the finance team, the procurement team, the vendor team. They all have little niches of ways that they could be phished or they could have business email compromise or something to have fraudulent activity occur. So understand those trends in the environment and provide them with that 5-minute lunch and learn training on what they should be aware of this quarter, things like that.
Yeah, taking a step back on the training and stuff like that. Why is that, just for the listeners? Why is that important? Just broad strokes.
Broad strokes, awareness of what is happening in your environment is critical. So whether that is ensure you lock your car when you park it in a parking lot at a busy mall, because there's been a lot of reports of burglary. Same thing. This is our digital environment. There's been lots of reports of threat actors. So do these things to at least provide a minimum base level of safety in that environment.
Yeah, I listen to Darknet Diaries. I assume you probably have at some point. Or so
Yeah.
basically, for the listeners, it's like a show where they explain like different hacks in the past or social engineering, or every episode has at least one story of something that has happened in the past, and it's a bit scary at first, because you're like, holy moly, like all of these things have happened and I've heard nothing of them. But it just gives you such a broad kind of knowledge of all of the different vectors that these people can attempt to attack. I find it fascinating.
Yeah, one of the things that I do love about that podcast is they really dive into the specific techniques and tactics that a threat actor might use. And sometimes they actually have the individual behind the hack share their story. And sometimes the voice is changed or it's hidden so that you don't know who it is. But it's a great show for that reason for disclosing that.
Yeah, yeah. And moving on to the big thing now at the moment. So like AI. So has the introduction of AI made practicing good cybersecurity more difficult, or are you actually able to use it itself to kind of keep up the battle?
Both. Um, so on the make it more difficult, AI has been around for a long time. It's primarily in the past been used for business intelligence and trading and making decisions based on data. Now that it has a public-facing capability where it can generate information on the fly, now you have threat actors that are using that to generate attacks or generate phishing emails that are more realistic than when they use Google Translate to translate something before, or they tried in their best English to type it out, but their English wasn't that good. So they're using generative AI to create those more advanced looking tactics. On the back end, you can also use AI to detect um, uh, an IP address or a domain that is sending a mass amount of mail, or all of certain attacks are calling back to that domain or that IP address. So you can use it for both good and bad. From the generative part, there's a lot of information out there on how to attack a system, but less information out there on how to secure a system. And that's because each installation of a system is almost sort of unique to that organization. There might be similarities, but if you've ever supported an organization and you've gone through the support documentation, you're like, yeah, that's true up until you get here, and then you have to do this special thing that only we do in our organization, and then you can get it to work. So that's the reason that using generative AI to say create playbooks to block things might be a little bit harder, but it is still possible. And it's really good on detecting anomalies and detecting things that uh, a human can't process in as quickly of a time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've never thought of it that way, actually. I was a support engineer before I became a product manager in a few different roles. So that's totally true. Yeah, even the support engineers didn't know how to get into the system sometimes. So yeah, that rings true. And like, should you be like the AI stuff is there, but should you be integrating it into your cybersecurity practices? Like it seems like it's just in a move fast and break things mode now, and that is kind of counterintuitive to me to good cybersecurity.
Yes, it definitely is in that move fast mode, but there is ways to do it securely. Um, Thinking back to good organizational governance and data governance is the first step before you go down the AI route. And oftentimes today, it's a step that people go, oh, we forgot about that. They enabled it, and then now all their data's out, and they have to try to delete it or try to claw back information from where it was. So the advice that I would give to anyone considering using AI is A, ensure that you have a good data governance structure in place. And then B, wherever possible, try to do that AI within your own cloud environment. There's ways to replicate the trained models, bring them in-house, and do the compute yourself. Yes, it will cost a little more, but your data will be secure in the long run. Um, Short of that, if you do use commercial AI, say OpenAI, Gemini, other alternatives, block off sensitive information within your organization from leaving or from being sent to that AI. So scope it very narrowly within your organization. Like only use it for marketing material, which will end up being public material anyway. So you can use it to generate that or generate help scripts for things that are publicly available. A chatbot that has been tested to only give a narrowly defined set of information within a data index that you provide. Things like that. You can use it to enable your organization and facilitate easier interactions with clients.
Nice. And that's kind of just baking these things into your strategy. So like touching you one of your key areas of expertise obviously is strategic planning. So I want to touch on that for a minute and then we'll come back to the AI part and how you can bake it all in together. Um, Strategy, this is like the word that I was told I need to get practice on. I'm a senior PM now. I wasn't until recently. I never had strategic. I had strategic planning within my team, but that was the thing I was always told you need to get strategic expertise or strategic planning expertise to get to the next level. Like that's it's they keep saying that and then you never get involved in the strategic, so it's like that chicken and egg thing. You have to get it to move on, but you don't get it. I'm getting a bit of it now, so I have a feel for it somewhat, but it's kind of so how can someone get that exposure to the strategic kind of planning and stuff like that when they have
I'll
very
share
little
how
chance of it.
I did it. The way I did it was it's a lot of research into the trends and things that are changing. So for me, for example, AI, researching how AI worked, how AI models process data, um, understanding the business use cases for AI and how you could do that securely, and then working with businesses to see how they wanted to use AI. And then you can go, well, these are a safe way that you can use it to achieve that business case. And you're going to them with a strategy on how to do it safely versus going, oh, let me figure that out for you. So it's a lot of self-research, a lot of keeping up with the trends, but keeping up with the trends in a way that you're going to solve business problems. And that's the key, is really understanding the business mission for the companies that you support, what you're looking to deliver, and then how you can help them achieve that in a more efficient way, a more cost-effective way, a safer way so that it reduces reputational harm, potential breaches, things like that. So you're looking to save the organization time in some way or process.
Yeah, this is something that I'm doing a lot now. Is it's the outcome focused or North Star kind of metrics, that kind of thing. It's I'm actually, for the listeners, I have a blog coming out soon about how to be more outcome oriented in feature teams, basically. It's something I have a lot of experience in trying to get out of, basically, and a bit more. Yeah, but so on the strategic side, so you are a fractional CISO, CISO,
Yeah.
either or.
Yeah, I've grown to like cybersecurity advisor.
Okay.
And I'll say the reasons why is for some in the field, I have never held a CISO title, but I advise a lot of CISOs. I worked in organizations large and small. So even today, I'm providing that cybersecurity advisory consulting or that executive advisor function. Um, the field has had a lot of demand for virtual or fractional CISOs. And really what that means is either the business can't afford potentially a full-time CISO to help them with their security strategy, or they're looking for additional guidance to come in on a part-time or consulting basis to kind of advise their existing CISO or their existing CXO staff on their security strategy and how to address that.
Okay, yeah. So that was one of my questions. Like, how can a small company, maybe they've only a handful of staff, how do they, with limited cybersecurity knowledge, how do they act on that? How do they act on the threats that they're seeing?
Yeah, well, so getting a fractional CISO is one way. Working with a mature managed service provider or managed security service provider kind of helps them mature in other functions. But what I would say is just like any shared service, you have to understand the shared responsibility that comes with that. So, not assuming that because you have a managed service provider or managed security service provider, that they're going to do everything for you. No, there's a list of things that they do, and there's a list of things that they don't do, or you should get that defined so you understand where that line in the sand is of what you and your team are responsible for. So those are things to consider as you're looking to onboard additional support for that.
Yeah, like to me, it's obvious that you need to take care. You need to take into account cybersecurity measures when you're doing your strategic planning and stuff. But how it's such a it's a hard metric to put a number on when you're like trying to okay, so my projects now are automating manual tasks, and that's one of the projects I'm working on at the moment. We have a specific I have a specific metric I'm trying to follow for cybersecurity. It's like the threat of a hack, or
Mhm.
how can you quantify the impact of that when you're trying to do outcome focused?
That's a great question. And actually, I was just focusing on addressing that in one of the books that I'm revising right now called Hack the Cybersecurity Interview. And it was within the CISO chapter. So what you kind of have to understand is the application that you're working on, the types of data and on data relations that are within that application. How sensitive are there? What type of information on are there? And then what are they connected to in regards to other data sets that a threat actor might be able to pivot to? Um, and then you think of, okay, what's the worst case scenario? How many records are there? What are the breach fines? What are the recovery fines? What does the Verizon DBIR say in regards to a breach for uh, other organization in our industry? How much did that cost them? And then you kind of use that to quantify a uh, little worst case scenario to a major worst case scenario, and then work with your organization to determine, okay, well, what's the likelihood of this occurring? Because the worst case scenario, it could happen, but it might be once in a million years, or it could be, hey, our practices are so poor, this could literally happen to us every year. So telling them, okay, these are the costs, this is the reputational impact, and try to quantify that for them so that they can make a decision and make a decision towards, for example, what you're doing with your program management, going, okay, we are going to support the development of these features. And as part of that, we're going to reduce our residual risk impact by this amount based on how you quantify risk within your organization. And that could be a way to focus on your outcome as
Yeah.
part of your development.
Yeah, luckily enough, I suppose I've had a lot of exposure to it. I worked in MasterCard originally. I'm in a financial company now, and I was on an audit log team in my previous role. So like, I've had pretty much every role I've had for the last 7 or 8 years has been either PCI regulated or like heavily PII data. So we
Mhm.
had to have very secure practices. But yeah, it's something that it's hard to put a number on when you don't have exposure to those type of things. I think one thing that I find that I argue I'm a big proponent for like tech debt. You know, getting rid
Mhm.
action on tech debt. I set aside 20% capacity on my teams and I stick to it. I'm rigid with that. Um, do you see tech debt as another way of kind of preparing for cyber threats, like acting on tech debt? Would that be
Yes.
accurate?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Because, for example, when you look at Log4j, Log4j was tech debt in definition. It was a vulnerability that for most organizations existed within a library that they either brought in or had a dependency on for logging, and it was exploited. Um, Many organizations didn't fully understand how that exploitation of Log4j within their logging stack could affect them. So you have a tech that with a active threat at the time that everyone was concerned about how could they solve. So that's definitely a use case that you should be using towards helping your organization mature in a consistent fashion by burning down those old vulnerabilities, by monitoring the source code if you're a development organization, ensuring that you keep up with the fixes within your library, that you have a secure library, things like that help with your software development lifecycle.
Yeah, again, this is my support background. I know what can happen when tech debt just piles up. Your platform gets buggy, like your customer experience degrades, and this is just a win-win in all areas. Like you can cover that aspect, and you can also cover potentially getting a better customer experience for in those areas too. But like, how else apart from tech debt? Like that's not the holy grail. That's not going to solve all the problems. How can organizations kind of assess their how they are currently at a cybersecurity, like what's their posture at the moment? Where do they start?
Well, that's a great way by doing an assessment. There's lots of great frameworks out there depending on where in the world you are. In the States here, the NIST CSF is one that I like to use. It acts as an organizational assessment for the frameworks that you have in your business as well as your tech stack to ensure that you have visibility all across the way. And then it marries down to a control framework like NIST 853, but it also has it acts like a Rosetta Stone because it has a great alignment with other control frameworks like ISO, like CIS, so that you can use NIST CSF as a great baseline, and then you can marry those controls over to other control frameworks. So you being in Europe, very dependent on the ISO standards. So a lot of companies there focus on ISO 27000 as their framework of choice versus NIST CSF. So depends where you are, what framework you want to use. Also depends on where your customers are and what sort of frameworks you're calling for. So that could be an investment within your organization if you're looking to say expand from the European market to the US market, that you have that marrying up to the US controls, or vice versa, marrying up to the European controls as part of your go-to-market strategy and deployment for acquiring new customers in those areas.
Yeah, I kind of I was the GDPR officer for my product back in was it 2017. I had to do the glossary of all of our tables, and I have exposure to that again, but luckily enough, I suppose. But yeah, that's a really good idea. And you're writing a lot recently about incident response planning. Is that part of your assessment, or is that like the next step?
Well, that's always part of your assessment. So the blogs that you reference is part of a series that I've been doing. It started from Rafiq, who created what's called a CISO mind map. and it kind of lists off the technical topics that a CISO should be aware of in their role, because not all CISOs come from a technical background. So I thought, why not write a blog a week about the different topics? And with my focus on small, medium-sized businesses, I kind of try to correlate those blogs to actionable things that these small businesses can do, even at their size, to help prepare themselves. But yes, a good understanding of your infrastructure and how you would react to any sort of threat actor, having a playbook, having documentation that goes back to that as to what you would do, is always a great idea. And it doesn't have to be expensive. You can use OneNote, you can use Notion as great wikis or collection of playbooks that you can use. Or if you want to go more sophisticated, like using Jupyter One as your playbook, you could do that as well. Really depends on how mature your organization is.
Yeah, yeah. I'm actually I did a blog. I'm doing weekly tips. It's my way of posting once a week. I'm trying to get better at writing as well. But one of them was a pre-mortem from Shreya Doshi. He was talking about, instead of a post-mortem, you do it before your product goes
Yep,
out. What could go wrong?
yep.
Are we prepared for this? I think that's a really cool idea. I've always been a fan of having. I had a thing called an impact analysis.
Mhm.
You know, when you're refining epics, here are all the things that have happened before. Like, have we prepared for these in this new feature? Like, there's loads of different ways of doing it. I just a lot there. Once you do some of them, I think it's really important.
Yeah, threat
And
modeling is another great example. Is you take your application and you say, what could a threat actor do, or what could happen to the organization if these things happen? And tabletop exercises are another great way to do that, but do that more organizational wide. Okay, um, everyone switch roles. CFO, you're now the CISO. CISO, you're now legal. Kind of have them take a different perspective in the tabletop so they think differently and they say what they would do in that scenario if they know where the policies and procedures are, if they know how to handle a breach response, things like that. And kind of run through that with the leadership team so that they're all familiar with each other's roles. Because, like you said, someone could leave, someone could get a new role. What happens then if you don't have a smooth transition period? So there should be cross training amongst your peers to help each other out in case something happens.
it's a good idea. Yeah, no, I've never thought of it that way. I actually I've been Lenny's podcast is new to me. I don't know if you've heard of it. I've been catching up for the last year, trying to catch up to hundreds of episodes. But one of them was the I think she was the head of Meta. She adopted an emulator of people around her company in her head. So it's like, I am now the security expert. What would that person think of this scenario? So that's kind of similar to what you're saying
Mhm.
there, and that's that's kind of comes to the culture as well. Like if you're doing these kind of exercises with the team, there has to be a culture of cybersecurity kind of awareness among the employees, right?
Yeah, exactly. Awareness. And rather than calling it cybersecurity awareness, I would just call it a risk aware culture. And if you switch it and you take out the cyber word, everyone doesn't go, oh, that's up to the CISO team. Oh, that's up to the IT team. No, this is everyone's responsibility, whether you're in sales to make sure you're not just giving out secret information to your competitors, or whether you're in support, making sure that you're not just resetting credentials for someone that isn't who they say they are. So it has to be a culture across the organization, and it has to be part of all decision-making processes. And if you try to implement policies and procedures and you have a layer of your organization that doesn't follow them, that will quickly become evident within your culture, is they will not believe in the value of those things that you say that you value.
Hmm. It's again surprising to me why there is this hesitation to in a lot of companies to adopt this approach. Like What reasons do they have for not adopting, robust measures, and despite the risks that we're going through here that are very obvious?
Well, I'd say sometimes it's awareness. Sometimes they don't know. I mean, just like you weren't aware, oh, you could do a tabletop in this way. You have the same thing. Each group within the organization is focused very linearly within their skill sets. So the finance team is very linear. The operations team, it might have some experience here, but they're really focused on their skill set. So the same for them thinking about IT or cyber, they don't think about. They just want to know how to solve their role, and you kind of have to share that top level knowledge with them in a consistent way, but you don't have to brand it as cyber knowledge. You can brand it as risk knowledge that you could take home. Hey, you don't want to be answering these emails on your personal email. You don't want to give away your bank account information just to any person that asks. Same thing here at work. So take these same approaches that we're teaching you and use them at home. Share them with your mom, your sister, your aunt, and then that way it becomes part of their own internal decision-making process.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny that you mentioned that because it's just a phrasing of something that can changing the phrasing can make people want to like. I said there, I do the impact analysis. I called it that because I didn't want to call it quality gates because of the negative connotations with quality gates. But now I'm changing the title again, probably to gotcha checklist because impact analysis is very formal, and I always explain. Well, it's kind of a gotcha checklist before we release stuff. What gotchas did we get caught with before? It's funny the way you phrase something can change how people think about it. Just
Absolutely. And as
yeah,
culture changes, you have to adjust your phrasing and your language. There might be terminologies that were acceptable 15, 20 years ago that are still in your policies and procedures, and you might want to change that as well to adjust to the changing culture.
yeah. It was the last company. It was a lot of people who had came from big tech, and they moved. It was a scale up at the time, and they were quality gates, or people coming from big tech did not want to go near quality gates. So that's kind of why I had to change it. But yeah, that's super interesting, and for we're kind of one of the risks I wanted to touch on because I'm just super curious about it. Little bit off topic, but supply chain threats.
Mhm.
Could you just give me like the cliff notes of what supply chain threats are and why are they so dangerous?
Well, we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier with Log4j. When you are within a shared environment, whether you are using shared services, you are developing with code or operating with code that was developed somewhere else, you're inheriting any risk from that code stack, from that application, from that service provider into your own risk matrix, into your own risk environment. So you have to say, okay, there is a potential that my vendors could cause risk to me. What can I do to either observe, limit, and reduce the impact from that? So, physical example of this was a HVAC vendor was the hole for Target's PCI breach, where all their card readers were skimming information for a threat actor. They came in because there was an access port for HVAC vendor to come in and monitor their IT OT, their HVAC system, and that was then connected within the same network as their PCI information. So it presented a vulnerability. So you have to think about that, how the interactions from your vendors can affect you.
Yeah, yeah, super interesting, and I'm pretty sure there's been a few episodes on Darknet Diaries as well. It's a fairly common practice. But just wrapping things up, we're coming up on time, but I just want to kind of touch on well, first of all, your books. Let's hear about them. What are you writing at the moment?
Well, my books have always kind of been focused on helping to encourage and develop the next generation. So, the first one I wrote was Develop Your Cybersecurity Career Path. and that was by a publisher called the CISO Desktop Reference Guide, and they have a lot of other reference guides for CISOs. The second one is by a publisher called Packet, and it's called Hack the Cybersecurity Interview. And we're doing our second revision of that one, updating it to changes and kind of bringing in thoughts and approaches that are more globally centric versus US centric.
And does that that brings me to another question that I wanted to wrap up with. How can someone get into cybersecurity? If you're thinking, I want to get into that area, it sounds super exciting. How do you do it?
I would say by kind of figuring out why. Why do you want to get into cyber? What problem do you want to solve? And then how can you solve that problem? Because cybersecurity is a vast field, just like finance or operations. There's many different subcategories within it. Um, there's GRC, application security, physical security. There's so many different aspects. So you have to figure out why you want to solve that problem, that will drive you more than just a paycheck. Because if you go after the paycheck, you're going to get burnt out. And then how can you solve those problems? So they could be current problems that you're looking to solve, or it could be future problems and where you're creating your own path. So, for example, a lot of folks today are developing a prompt engineering career for themselves by using prompt engineering, which is interactions with a generative AI model to get responses from it. So depending on how you phrase the question, you might get different responses. So people are creating careers like that to test generative models to ensure that you're not giving vulgar information, private information, incorrect information, so that the developers of those models can kind of refine the responses that you're giving.
Oh, super interesting. Yeah, prompt engineering is something I find fascinating now because I'm starting to use ChatGPT a lot for a lot of things. But yeah, that's really cool. And last question, it's a really easy one. What is the future of cybersecurity over the next 5 years, 10 years? What do you think?
Well, I think AI is going to be a big part of it, but think of AI as another tool. AI can, generative AI for the moment really just regurgitates knowledge that it has access to, and it can correlate and predict what the next best word means. As AI develops, it will become more intelligent and it will be able to connect the dots between separate theories that you might not have connected before. So keeping up with that will be one way. Um, there's still the advancement of cloud and cloud infrastructure. Like you mentioned, kids don't know file structures. So it will be keeping up with that advancement of everything as a service, and how do you support organizations in a secure way in that environment. Those would be the two big focuses that I would say.
Nice, that's great. Well, I'm out of questions and we're out of time, but that was really fun. I really enjoyed that, and I hope the listeners did too. Christoph, thanks a million for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for tuning into today's episode. If you found value in what you heard, please share it across your social platforms. It helps us to reach others who might appreciate it just as much as you did. Don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Visit us at youngleaders.tech for more insights and resources. Along with our podcast archives and meetup recordings, we now feature exclusive weekly tips. These tips aim to improve your leadership skills, your job hunt or career progression, as well as in-depth blogs on product management, product operations, and support-driven development. Whether you're advancing your career or just starting out, there's something there for everyone. And if you, or someone you know, have something to share with our audience, we're always looking to connect with new speakers or writers. Please reach out through any of the contact links provided on our website or reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. Thanks again for listening, and we hope you join us again for the next episode.